Okay.
Stand by, and we're rolling.
Okay, Margo. I know that we've both felt that this is coming together, and it's such a, it's growing, you know, and we don't have to make it grow.
Yeah.
So can you tell me the original inspiration that you shared with me that got us started?
One of my first reasons for wanting to do the project about lesbianism and feminist activity in West Michigan during the 70s and early 80s was about a year ago, not quite a year ago, I went to visit my sister. I have 3 sisters, but this is the youngest of them, who's in her mid-40s now, and one of her good friends lives primarily in Manhattan, but goes to my sister's town, which is an artist, more or less an artist community in upstate New York, every summer. And so we were at one of their mutual friends' houses for 4th of July fireworks. And I was making small talk with this one particular friend, and she found out I was from Grand Rapids. And as I found in a lot of my travels, a lot of people have connections to Grand Rapids. And so she said, oh, I used to live there. I said, oh, how long ago? And she said, oh, and I forget now, but it was sometime in the 70s. And she said, yeah, I lived there the year I was a lesbian. I said, what? I need to know more about that. So it turns out she went to MishFest, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, in one of its early years. So maybe it was actually the 80s, now that the years are kind of coming together. But she went to MishFest and met a woman, and they fell in love. And this friend of my sister's wound up moving to Grand Rapids to be with this partner. And so she lived there for about a year, maybe a little bit more. And then shortly after the next MishFest, I think they broke up. So it was a short-lived affair, and she ended up moving away. But that was what started this conversation. And for me wanting to know a little bit more about that, when she was like, she started to say, oh, that was such a hub of lesbian activity, or everyone was a lesbian there. And we're talking about Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? It wasn't something that I had really thought of, because it is such a politically and religiously conservative area today. And she said, oh yeah, it was like that then too, but there were just all kinds of lesbians at the time. So I thought, I have to know more about that. So that's what made me want to dig a little deeper and to find out what happened then and why is it not continuing in the same way.
What makes you say it's not continuing?
Because, well, I don't think it's necessarily continuing in the same way nowadays, because probably a few reasons, one of which is not necessarily in this order of importance. I think the internet makes people a little bit more, a little less likely to communicate in groups, in person. So I think now, if there is a sort of lesbian community, it might be a small group of friends here and there, but it doesn't seem to have like this activism that it used to. And it also doesn't seem to make people want to stretch and meet each other in a personal way. I think a lot of people do tend to meet each other online first, and then can kind of develop friendships and meet in person. So I don't think it has the same kind of draw, especially in terms of activism. It's starting to come about a little bit more since I've been here the past few years, but there isn't a whole lot of activism happening, not a lot of community organizing happening, whereas it seems like that was really popular in the 70s and 80s. And also there aren't, that I'm aware of, there aren't any lesbian like businesses. You know, there's not a lesbian bar or a lesbian bookstore. So not, again, not a place that would be kind of identified as the place to go, other than Rumors on Ladies' Night, which was every other Friday night, you know, kind of tossing them a bone. So.
What's Ladies' Night?
Oh, Ladies' Night is, there are a few gay clubs in Grand Rapids, which actually surprised me when I was moving here. I didn't think there would be any. But there are a few gay clubs, and one of them is called Rumors. And it's LGBT, but primarily the clientele tends to skew towards gay men, except every first, third, and if there is a fifth Friday of the month, it is called Ladies' Night, which is, there's, as far as I know, not a discount for women, but it's more catering to women to come and you know, just have time at the bar and dance club. So it's not excluding anybody, but it's more to say, now's the time to come on out. So that's where I've met some people, like just to kind of get a sense of the community.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very clear. So you'd heard contrasting things about West Michigan. When you came here, have you a clear experience of it as a very conservative place?
Before I came to Grand Rapids the first time, I didn't have a lot of experience or a lot of knowledge about the receptions of LGBT individuals. I had an overall sense of the political atmosphere because a friend, actually a married couple that are friends of mine, had been living here already. So they had told me that it is very conservative, that it's very religious. Someone had said more churches per capita than anywhere else in the country, but I'm not sure if that's true. But it did make me aware that it does tend to be very Protestant and potentially evangelical. So based on that, I thought, okay, it's more conservative, and that kind of ties into the politics. So that was really my only knowledge of it before moving here.
But now that you're here, what do you think?
Now that I'm here, I agree with a lot of what I had been told beforehand, but I think I've also found a nice bubble of people that I've surrounded myself with, chosen family, who do tend to share more of my viewpoints, which are more liberal, Democrat. Some are Christian, some aren't, but it doesn't really play into how we interact with each other on a social level. So most of my friends here are lesbian, not so much gay, bisexual or transgender, or somehow queer identified. So I think I've also had maybe a skewed sense of some of the population because I don't have a lot of straight friends here. So I think that that's given me a different world to experience.
Have you had any bad experiences?
I personally have not had any bad experiences while I've been here. I haven't really had the opportunity to be in a partnership while I'm here, at least in a very extended period. So for that reason, it's not like I've been holding hands with someone and would be encountered with negativity. It's more just me walking along the road by myself, or, you know, in a group of people. And in a group of people, I don't stand out as queer, which is a term that I use as a kind of reappropriation. A lot of people in generations now use queer as a reappropriation compared to being a negative term, kind of using it as an empowered term or an umbrella term. But I haven't had negativity really, but there have been some terms that I think have been misused by some students, and there have been some misunderstandings or even some negativity, negative comments that students have made in classes that I try and explore a little bit and see what exactly are they saying, because I haven't come out to my students.
I don't want to ask you to talk about something painful, but I remember you came to my office and you were very upset.
Yes.
You want to talk about
Sure.
what happened?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me see, when was it? It was fall semester. Okay, so about a year and a half ago, it was fall semester of 2009. I was teaching a class called Media and Society, which is the broad term, and the kind of subcategory that I had given to it, because it's a special topics course, was sexuality and film and television, or sexuality and cinema. And it was dealing with broad topics of sexuality and gender and these kind of classic ideas of what the woman's role used to be and what the man's role used to be, and ways of reading into some of the media and having different interpretations that might not have been exactly what was on the surface. So we were doing that for a lot of the semester, and then maybe the last third of the semester was dealing more with LGBT content. So one of the last weeks of the semester, I decided to show a couple of examples of television primarily that were going to challenge them perhaps in a way, put them outside of their comfort zones. So one of them was a clip from, or a few clips from the TV show In Living Color, which was a sketch comedy show in the early 90s and it was primarily dealing with an African-American cast. And so the clip that I showed was featuring 2 African-American cast members playing flamboyantly gay men, kind of caricaturized gay men. And it was this sketch that everybody at the time when it was out just loved, and I remember being a little kid and my friends, you know, kind of parodying it in classrooms. And it was 2 gay men having commentary on various pop culture things, movies, music, whatever. And so I showed that. I showed a couple of examples from that to my students, and they got a big laugh. And then right after that, I showed them a longer piece by Marlon Riggs called Tongues Untied, which I think in a lot of maybe academic circles is quite well known, but for a lot of students, they'd never heard of it. And so I wanted to show that in its entirety, and I didn't want to in any way coddle the students by giving them any kind of preface or warning, because I thought that would be doing it an injustice. I hadn't given them any kind of coddling or preface when I was showing them, you know, I dream of Jeannie, so why would I now? I wanted to treat them fairly and as adults.
What?
Good?
So they got this buzz came
Oh,
back,
no.
but now it's gone.
It's okay?
I-
Okay.
Let me just change the shot and
Yeah.
just so you can keep going.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead. All right.
So I decided to show this example to my students immediately following In Living Color. And I was sitting up at the front because that was where the controllers were, and we were in an abbreviated time period. So I wasn't aware exactly of how the students were responding to it, but I could hear some heavy sighs, and I was starting to get worried that maybe they were feeling alienated. But it wasn't until the show had ended that I realized just how alienated some of the students were. And one of them came up to me. She was a non-traditional student who often spoke with me outside of class. And she was feeling really agitated at the fact that I had shown them this, particularly Tongues Untied. And she said, I don't know why you're having us read these things. I don't know why you're having us watch these things. They're really offensive. My husband just doesn't know what I'm doing in this class. It's, you know. And I said, okay, well, talk to me. Why do you find this offensive? So I was trying to get to the bottom of it, even though I was feeling like really worried. And she said, well, I'm not alone. Some of the some of the students in here were putting in their iPod earbuds. Some were leaving. You know, no one wanted to watch this. I thought, okay, I think that this is really important to get to the bottom of, because a lot of what we had been talking about was dealing with representations in film and television, and what we find comfortable and what we just immediately accept and what we challenge. And so I asked her what her response was to the In Living Color sketch. And she said, oh, I thought it was really funny. And I said, okay, why do you think it was funny? She said, well, you know, they were just lighthearted and it wasn't offensive. And I was like, I think to some people it might be offensive. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show this other side, also showcasing African-American gay men as real people instead of caricatures. And she kind of gave me that, but then she said, it just made me uncomfortable. And I said, well, could you tell me what made you uncomfortable? She said, it was just too graphic. I was like, well, could you tell me what parts were too graphic? She said, well, they were naked and they were, and I said, well, there was no sex simulated or non-simulated. There was some kissing, but that wasn't nude bodies kissing, it was 2 men kissing. There was a sequence that was a man's naked torso, but again, it wasn't genitalia. And again, it was about examining the human body and dealing with racial representations in media. And I kind of expected this reaction, because if we get images of LGBT individuals, it's almost always going to be gay men, and it's almost always going to be asexualized gay men. The Will and Grace phenomenon, where they never actually have anything sexual happening, it's more just insinuation, and it's safe. But with this, it was showing them as sexual beings, and that made a lot of the students uncomfortable. So during that class period, it just kind of broke my spirits to see in this day and age how youth, who are by so many regards so much more progressive than the generations past, particularly when Tongues Untied came out, to see the generation now that I was so optimistic about being accepting, just tuning it out completely and not even engaging in a way by saying, I don't like this and this is why, but by completely removing themselves from being participants. It really hurt to think that's, I think, what a lot of people deal with. They just, human beings that would rather just not be looked at, you know, or other people who'd rather just not look at human beings. So it made me feel really upset in the grand scheme, and then specifically about, was I making the right decision to do this? Should I not have done this? Was I somehow crossing a line by showing these? And also, as a woman who identifies as bisexual, was this in some way also an attack on me? And not to make it too personal, of course, because I know that it's a broad thing, but I started to think, okay, if they're not accepting of this particular example, might that also mean they won't accept me if I were ever to talk to them about that? So it really rattled me. And I came to you because I just really wanted someone to talk to and to kind of let it out. And I'm grateful that you were there.
And I feel upset all over again.
It was, you know, and I tried to collect myself afterward. Mm-hmm. And by the next class period, I think I had that class Mondays and Wednesdays, I believe in the mornings, very early mornings, which was another dilemma of having these very intense screenings and conversations at 9:30 in the morning. But I tried to approach it, as I had with all of the other examples, of saying, this isn't about if you like it or you don't like it. Instead, this is what we get in the media, and let's break down what this is. What are they telling us based on the sources that we're getting this from, our own reactions to it as our own demographic of a classroom, and how might this reflect broader society? And so the first thing I did when I came in, I said, okay, I know there were some pretty mixed reactions to that. So I wrote on one side of the board, agree, and on the other side of the board I wrote disagree. And I said, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want everybody to stand somewhere along the board where you feel like you fit in relation to these questions. And so the first thing I said was, I felt uncomfortable watching Tongues Untied. And I asked them to stand wherever they felt, and the majority felt they agreed. They felt uncomfortable. But it was kind of scattered, and a few said, no, I didn't feel uncomfortable. And so that was an opportunity for them to own their feelings, and for me to say, why did you stand there? Let's talk about it, not as an attack, but let's get to the bottom of why you felt uncomfortable. And really the consensus was, we had never seen anything like this before. And I didn't know how to feel. I'm not used to seeing men kiss. I'm not used to seeing African American men kiss. I'm not used to hearing stories about people living with HIV and AIDS. I'm not used to hearing people use terms that we've been taught for so long that are negative to use, like the not F-U-C-K word, but the other F word. Yeah. And having these first-person stories told to them in such a way without this kind of comedy filter, I think was really alarming for some. So all in all, I think, okay, I felt much better at the end of that day, but it was still, it still made me nervous as I thought back about it. Yeah.
Thinking ahead, and we're not sure what forms this is going to take, but what do you see as the purpose of this project that we're working on?
I think that this project is crucial for several reasons, one of which is because as I've been trying to do more research just for myself, and I think as you've been doing research for yourself just to learn more about it, there hasn't been much available. There hasn't been very much documented about this time in our history. And I don't think that's a huge surprise considering, you know, in the 70s and early 80s, men, predominantly white straight men, still had the power of press. And so there wasn't a lot that was covered with it. But I think that it is important because with generations now that are kind of becoming aware of diversity and maybe owning their own identities without having to define themselves based on these very narrow, rigid definitions. I think it is important to learn from what had come before us and to present that to other people too and say, look at all the work that they did. And we don't have to do it all from the start anymore. We can learn from what they did. And we can appreciate that and pay homage. And then maybe learn from things that didn't work so well and adapt. So that's one of the first reasons that I wanted to do this. And then I also think that it's important to learn that regions aren't so easily stereotyped. I come from the South, the Bible Belt. Like where I come from, everyone would describe it as the buckle of the Bible Belt, Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's very politically conservative and religiously conservative. And I think it's more vocally opposed to LGBT issues than West Michigan, very much so. But this sense of not being alone, I think, is so hugely important now. That even within these areas that might be perceived to be very conservative and more or less homogenous, no, there are so many other voices out there, and it's about just looking and understanding that you're not alone. I think that's hugely important.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Is there something else you'd like to talk about?
I would love to know more about, this is just something I was thinking, I would love to know more about like what it was like to be like a single person, particularly a lesbian in the 70s and early 80s in West Michigan, if you weren't affiliated with Thomas Jefferson College or William James College. How did you find people to make a group? How did you first get into any kind of like a social, of course there wasn't the internet. There wasn't